All right, so the last topic, the last sort of body system or function we need to talk about in terms of human homeostasis is the immune system or human immunity. Obviously, this is a topic we are extremely interested in now because our immune system is what helps to protect us from pathogens, and that's obviously an important function. So, before we even really get into our immune system, our body has a variety of ways of preventing pathogens from even getting a hold in our body. So, a pathogen is basically an organism that can cause a disease. So, it could be a bacteria, it could be a virus, could be a protist, parasite, could be an animal parasite, could be lots of different things, but our body the best way to defend against pathogens is to not ever let them take hold in the body. And so there are ways that our body does this. So one is through our skin. So our skin is obviously the outside of our body, but it's a barrier, right? It's a way to prevent diseases from entering into our body. Our skin is pretty impervious. Most organisms cannot get through our skin. Bacteria and viruses don't. Some animal parasites can get through the skin, but for the most part, the skin provides a pretty good barrier to the entry into our body of pathogens. Our nasal passage, okay? Our nasal cavity. We talked about this when we talked about the respiratory system. We have little nose hairs and we have mucus inside of our nose and our nasal cavity that helps filter out little bits of material that could include pathogens. Right? As we inhale, if we're inhaling any bacteria or viral particles, they may get trapped in that mucus that's in our respiratory system, preventing them from getting into our body. Same thing in our trachea. We have mucus and we have hairs, cilia, that basically filter out some materials. In our stomachs even. So the high acidity in our stomachs, that really low pH, one thing that does is it helps to kill bacteria that we may ingest in foods that we eat. So if you eat a piece of undercooked liver that happens to have some bacteria in it, well, as you ingest it, perhaps your stomach acids will be able to kill that bacteria, preventing you from getting an infection. Now, it's certainly not perfect. There are organisms that can survive those conditions, but it's one additional line of defense. Tears are another example. Tears can inhibit the growth of bacteria in our eyes. Okay, earwax as well. Secretions from the urethra and vagina as well help inhibit the growth of bacteria and pathogens. So the overall idea is that the best way to prevent infection is to prevent these pathogens from getting into our body. But they're not perfect. And sometimes pathogens do get into our bodies. And then it's our immune system that picks up and starts to fight against these pathogens. So the human immune system is composed of the white blood cells that are part of our circulatory system. It's also part of our immune system. And these white blood cells, they have nuclei in them. So unlike red blood cells, they have a nucleus. Sometimes they even have more than one nucleus. A single drop of blood could have, up to 10,000 of these white blood cells. However, when we have some active infection, that number will go up drastically. Our body responds to infection by producing more white blood cells. They're usually about the same size or maybe larger sometimes, depending, than a red blood cell. And they're actually, our body's immune response is very complex. It's far more complex than we'll get into this year. There's different types of immune system cells, different types of white blood cells, B cells and T cells, memory cells, natural killer cells, macrophages. There's all sorts of different cells that work together to help our body fight off infection. And one thing that is important for you to understand, we don't need to get into all the complexities of the immune system, but antibodies are really important to understand. Antibodies are protective molecules that help us fight infection. Some of our white blood cells actually engulf and destroy pathogens at the site of infection. Some of these white blood cells signal other cells. Some of them mark pathogens to be destroyed. So there's all sorts of complex things going on in our immune system. So let's talk about that a little bit. So there's this term, sometimes can be confusing, but a pathogen is an organism that causes disease. And on the surface of these pathogens are molecules that basically identify them. They're called antigens. All cells have antigens on them, even our own body cells. They act as sort of like an advertisement saying what type of cell this is. So our immune system doesn't attack our own kidney cells because it knows they're part of our body. How does it know? Because they have the proper antigens that the immune system recognizes as being part of our body. This is why a person that gets an organ transplant has to be on immunosuppressant drugs. Because if you take my kidney and put it into my daughter's body, now those antigens are slightly different. And so it's possible her immune system is going to recognize those antigens on the kidney that was transplanted and say, hey, this is not part of your body, and then attack it. Now, because she's my daughter, we're related, we have similar genetics, it's less likely, okay? But that is a possibility. So that's why a person with an organ transplant needs those drugs to suppress their immune system. So even a virus or a bacteria has on its surface of the cell these antigens that say, hey, I am, the Ebola virus. Hey, I am a Salmonella bacteria. Okay. I am an E. coli bacteria. I am a COVID-19 virus. So they have these antigens on them. And our immune system can learn what these antigens look like and produce antibodies that basically bind to the antigens. So antibodies are these molecules that our immune system produces. And they're proteins. And because they're proteins, what is so important about them? Please, people. What is important about proteins?
Shape.
Yes, thank you. How many times have I said that in the last 2 weeks? Yes, it's their shape. The shape of the antibody matches the shape of the antigen and can bind to it. That's what we see going on here. Okay, these purple, we often, these antibodies are these Y-shaped molecules that have binding sites on them. You can see them here. The shape of these binding sites matches with an antigen. So you could see in this diagram here, this is a pathogen, these green circular things. These purple things are the antibodies, and you can see the shape of those binding sites is matching with these antigens, and they're starting to clump up these pathogens together so that the rest of the immune system can come in and destroy them. So here we can see these antibodies, the binding site matches with the antigen that's on this pathogen. Same thing, this one matches with this. Antibodies are specific, just like enzymes are specific, and hormones are specific. They're specific because of their shape. That an antibody that will attach to the chickenpox virus will not attach to the coronavirus. and also one attached to a salmonella bacteria because the shapes don't match. These antibodies are specific to one type of pathogen. So once we are exposed to a specific pathogen, our immune system will produce antibodies against it. And they help in the fight against that pathogen, but they also stick around for a while. Okay? They also can be produced rapidly if there's ever another infection by the same pathogen. And so when I was a kid, I know you guys didn't, but when I was a kid, I got chickenpox, the disease. Everyone did. Because there was no chickenpox vaccine at that point. So when I was a kid, and I was in elementary school, sometime I got chickenpox, right? I had to stay home from school, I got real itchy, and then I got better. My immune system fought off the chickenpox virus that was in my body, and I got better. But my immune system also produced antibodies. That now recognize the chickenpox pathogen, the virus itself. The binding site on those antibodies matches with antigens on the chickenpox virus. And so even though I've probably been exposed to the chickenpox virus later on, in junior high or something, even if I was exposed and it got into my body, my immune system was ready to fight it off. My immune system would quickly produce antibodies. It would attach to the chickenpox virus, and I actually would never get sick, even though the virus was in my body. And so that's why with certain diseases, once you're infected once, you have immunity to those diseases, like the chickenpox was. Now, that's called active immunity. Your body producing its own antibodies. Now, sometimes it lasts your entire life. Like once you're exposed, for example, the chickenpox, typically you don't ever get it again, even if you're exposed. But there's also the possibility of being vaccinated. And being vaccinated against a certain disease is basically recreating the experience I was just describing about when I had chickenpox. Okay, a vaccine inside of the injection, what they give you, there's other types of vaccines. You could get an inhaled vaccine as well. But what they're injecting into you is a form of the pathogen that has been either destroyed or maybe weakened, or maybe it's just a part of that virus's DNA or RNA. But they're injecting some kind of part of this pathogen into your body so that your immune system can basically learn what it looks like, produce antibodies, so that if you're ever actually exposed to the pathogen, your immune system is already primed to fight it. It already has an idea about what these antibodies look like. You can produce antibodies very quickly to fight off the infection so that hopefully you don't ever get sick. So you all actually got a chickenpox vaccine. So around the time my oldest daughter was born, she's now 23, that's when the chickenpox vaccine first was released. And she got vaccinated. So you all were vaccinated with chickenpox. So what they did is, chickenpox is a virus. They injected into you when you were a baby, probably, a dead form of chickenpox or a weakened form of chickenpox. Your immune system recognized this foreign virus and it destroyed it, but it learned how to make antibodies against it. And your body remembers that for decades or even your entire lifetime. And so if you ever actually got exposed to chickenpox virus, your immune system's ready, it will fight it off. You probably will never even get sick with chickenpox. That's how vaccines work, by sort of giving your body a preview of a pathogen to help you form antibodies so that you don't get sick if you're ever actually exposed. And we have vaccines for many different diseases. Okay. Again, this is just a model that shows that. The injection is a weakened or killed form of the disease. Your body creates antibodies to fight it off. And if the ever actual disease comes in, your body is ready to destroy it very quickly. So vaccines are a huge reason for increases in life expectancy and decreases in childhood mortality and so forth. Vaccines have only really been commonplace for the last century or so. Here's an example. This is showing polio. Polio is a disease caused by a virus that infected millions of people, caused them to be permanently have permanent damage to their muscles and unable to walk and so forth. So if you look here, this is the number of cases of polio. Okay, and when the polio vaccine was first introduced in 1955, that year, there were almost 30,000 cases. Look at over the next 5 years what happened to polio. It dropped way down until today. Basically, almost nobody gets polio. We're all vaccinated against it. This is a deadly disease that affected people in very damaging ways for their entire life. And we've basically eliminated this whole disease by vaccinating people. Same thing with like smallpox and other diseases. We've been able to basically wipe these diseases out through campaigns of vaccination. Now, there are some pathogens which we can't develop vaccines, or we haven't been able to develop vaccines yet. For example, the common cold is caused by a virus. But we don't have a vaccine. You can't get a cold vaccine. Okay? Some viruses change and mutate so rapidly that the vaccine that could be produced is not going to be effective in the future because those antigens are constantly changing. So there are some diseases which we have not been able to develop vaccines against. Okay? And obviously, like I said, you've heard in the news probably in the last couple weeks about a COVID-19 vaccine that's in development. It's being tested. And tomorrow we're going to talk about how that testing is going, what are the things we need to be aware of when we're developing vaccines. Any questions about the immune system? Okay. I want to just